The Syrian civil war has been going on since 2011 when protesters were gunned down. There were people who were voicing their opinions against the Assad regime. They were gunned down, and that led to an armed resistance to take place, to arise. And that happened when about 8 or 9, or maybe seven's the exact number, commanders from the Syrian army defected, and they formed the Free Syrian Army, whose goal was to topple the Assad regime. This was initially backed by the United States, and there was a great cry in the United States to topple the Assad regime, but Russia and Iran warned very heavily against it. So there was a bit of a reluctance. And then you saw the rise of ISIS, who they still are there today, are a very radical part of the rebel faction, and they actually fight with some other rebel groups. And there's also Al-Qaeda's affiliate, Al-Nusra. So you saw the war go from complicated to incredibly complicated over the span of a year, from 2012 to 2013. And then really there was no and then after that, there was no call to topple the Assad regime. Well, there was still somewhat of a call to fight both Assad and ISIS, but then the attention shifted more to ISIS. And then once Assad was losing a lot of ground, what happened was Russia stepped in to save the day for Assad and really changed the game. And now Assad is, rather than on the defensive, he's now on the offensive. So it really changed the whole dynamic of the situation in Syria. But then everything changed when Obama left office. Now Trump's in office. He has called initially for a collaboration with Russia and Assad to take out ISIS, to destroy ISIS, which right now we haven't really been seeing that because, he's really reluctant. He hasn't really been speaking to Russia. There's talks about collusion. I don't believe there's collusion, but Trump is right now not talking to Russia, really. He's not collaborating with them, but he has been sending more troops to Syria. He has about 1,000 there, and he said to send 1,000 more, kind of just to keep the area, some security in the area. Now, the purpose of this video is to talk about what my predictions will be for the Syrian civil war and how they will play out and who will end up on top. I think that there will be a diplomatic solution to the conflict, and Syria might end up getting divided, but that will only be the case if the rebels are able to prolong the war and are able to keep a strong foothold in a substantial amount of territory. If that's not the case, then Assad will take everything back. Now let me explain to you who has the upper hand here. In terms of strength, military strength and support, the Assad regime will have the upper hand 100%. They have the full might of the Russian army behind them, as well as Hezbollah and Shiite allied militias. But they do not have a large amount of manpower. They've lost close to 100,000 soldiers. Hezbollah lost a few thousand soldiers, a lot more who are wounded. Same goes for the Syrian army. They must have about maybe 50 to 100,000 soldiers with them, with probably 10,000 from Hezbollah and another 10 to 20,000 from the Shiite militias. So they do not have a lot of manpower. In terms of the rebels, they probably have about the same amount of manpower, whereas they're losing some, but they also have the majority. The Sunnis have the majority, and that's who lies with the rebels, the Sunnis. So if the rebels can hang on for long and they could put up fierce fights, the Syrian army will not have the manpower to confront the rebels until the end. They'll have to rely on, fighting via air, which is not as reliable as on the ground, where you could really clear out the areas. So I think the conflict will end in about 2 years completely. There will be a military a diplomatic solution to the conflict in about a year and 10 months or so. Now, that'll be interesting to see, but the only way the rebels will put up a fight is if they continue to stay on the offensive, and they could shift this out for as long as possible. Then there might be a diplomatic solution which leaves them with some land. But even if that's the case, there'll still be Sunnis in a Shia area, and there'll still be some potential for another war. So Iran is definitely on the side of Assad. If it came down to it, maybe they'd send their own 5,000 troops or something like that. But Assad is definitely gaining ground, absolutely. And the reason for that is Russia. Russia helped them out a lot. It was a game changer. So Trump will be the next game changer. We'll see what Trump does. Turkey is in the region, the Free Syrian Army. Every time the Free Syrian Army takes land from ISIS, it makes it more complicated because there's a fundamental difference, at least on the international recognition level. There's a fundamental difference between the FSA and Al-Qaeda and ISIS because they're seen as more moderate rebels. So every time FSA takes land from ISIS, that's a loss for the Assad regime, because they're technically enemies, even though they're both fighting ISIS at the moment. So we'll see what happens. My prediction is not more than 2 years left in this conflict, or at least for now, until it becomes a war. But Assad, it's tough. They're losing soldiers every day, Even if they lose 20 soldiers, that's a lot, and people are getting wounded, so they don't have the manpower to really take back all of the country. It's going to take a lot of time. The rebels are creating their own weapons, their own drones, stuff like that, and they have the foreign support of Qatar and all that. So, continue to see what happens. My apologies for that last pause. And yeah, it all depends on where the U.S. stands in this. If the U.S. wants to invest in a foreign, rebel faction like the Free Syrian Army, then that in itself will be a game changer. You have to also look at the Kurds and if they're going to continue to, ally with Assad, and if they want to eventually have their own territory. That's going to be an issue as well. So we'll definitely have an update on this video in the coming months.